It's 1934 and you're living in Houston, Texas, and a name emerges from obscurity. Roy Hofheinz, a graduate from Houston Law School. At age 22, he was elected to the Texas House of Representatives. At age 24, he was elected as a judge for Harris County. And in 1952, he started his first of 2 terms as mayor of Houston. He was a prominent figure in Houston politics, but he wasn't just a politician, he was a businessman, an ambitious one at that. In 1957, the Houston Sports Association was formed to bring a Major League Baseball franchise to Houston, and Judge Hofheinz joined the group 2 years later. In 1960, their efforts paid off. The Colt 45s were to join the National League in 1962, and the hunt was on for a permanent home. Hofheinz brought up the idea of a dome, the world's first multi-purpose dome stadium, and when it opened in 1965, it was deemed the 8th wonder of the world. But as always, Hofheinz was not about to rest on his laurels. The Astrodome would be part of what he called the Astrodomain. This would be a complex with baseball, lodging, and an amusement park. This would grow to be one of the best parks in the country, but like they say, good things don't last forever. This is part 1 of a 5-part documentary looking at the history of Astroworld. Join me as we celebrate this park's 37 thrilling years. The Colt 45s played their first game in 1962, attracting about 12,000 fans per game to Colt Stadium. This was a temporary stadium just built for the team, while Roy Hofheinz and his team had something spectacular in mind. To battle the brutal Houston summers, the Colt's new stadium would have a roof. It would use 6,400 tons of air conditioning to keep the temperature between 78 and 79 degrees. Hofheinz wanted to maximize comfort, saying, "A baseball park should be equally attractive to women as well as to men," pointing out the 40,000 foam rubber theater-style seats. It would also be specially designed to clear everyone out of the arena in 9 minutes and empty the parking lot in 20 minutes. This would cost a total of $19.4 million, or $190 million in 2023. Hofheinz also said the stadium would have an exploding scoreboard, extending from the right field line to the left field line and 60 feet tall. Hofheinz was known as a promotion-minded genius, and this sensational stadium was getting attention from all around the world. Unlike King Tut, it is unlikely that Roy Hofheinz will be buried in his pyramid. It's a sure thing, however, that barring nuclear destruction, the Dome Stadium will be a center of wonder rivaling the pyramids for generations to come. Frank Adams, Lake Charles American Press. The stadium was opened for the 1965 season. The Colts now fully owned by Roy Hofheinz and sporting a brand new name, the Astros. The dome was initially named Harris County Dome Stadium, but quickly changed to the much more catchy Astrodome. The team and the stadium were named in honor of the new Manned Spacecraft Center, opening back in 1961, giving Houston the nickname Space City. On April 9th, the Astros opened the stadium with an exhibition against the New York Yankees, a game attended by President Lyndon Johnson, Texas Governor John Connally, and Houston Mayor Lewis Welch. By August, Hofheinz said he expected 5 million people to visit the Astrodome by the stadium's first anniversary, and the investment made into the area should be even greater in the years to come. He referenced the soon-to-be-completed Expo Hall, as well as a Disneyland-type amusement park as an added bonus. Millions of people would come to see the Astrodome, complete with a Disneyland. The team, the Astros, the stadium, the Astrodome, the Expo Hall, the Astro Hall, and the amusement park, Astroworld. This would all be part of a massive complex that Hofheinz called Astrodomain. This complex is destined to become the world's greatest tourist attraction and bring untold millions of dollars into the Houston area economy. Within 5 years, he wanted to build it into a whole entertainment complex where a family could spend a whole week and never see the same thing twice. As the calendar turned over to 1967, Hofheinz approved the plans and secured financing for Astroworld. Initial estimates were between $16 and $20 million, sprawling over 100 acres south of the Astrodome. The park would be designed by Randolph Dwell and Associates, a California-based firm who already designed the first mega park in Texas, Six Flags Over Texas in Arlington, as well as work on sections of Disneyland. Astroworld would be international, having sections representing Japan, Switzerland, Germany, Italy, France, and others. As 1967 carried on, the site was shrunk down to 56 acres, and the price was increased to $25 million. Hofheinz announced it would be open for the summer of 1968, and it would carry the slogan, "The Wonderful World of Fun." The park and the dome would be connected by a 532-foot bridge over Interstate 610. 600,000 cubic yards of dirt had to be moved to landscape the park, with more than 50 features in the works needing mountains, lakes, and rivers. The same company hired to landscape Disneyland. Lanesh and Reynolds was tagged with adding thousands of trees, shrubs, and flowers, having only one solitary scrub tree to work with on the park site. Stan McElvaney was named the park's first general manager, having previous executive experience with Six Flags and in baseball. The park was touting its accommodation of 20,000 people an hour on rides and attractions, highlighting three major points of interest. First, Skyrama would stand 340 feet tall and serve as the observation tower. That would make it the world's tallest amusement ride. Then, the Alpine sleighs would rise up 65 feet into an artificial mountain, encountering snowstorms, glaciers, waterfalls, and the abominable snowman. Finally, Hofheinz would also undertake possibly his most ambitious project, outdoor air conditioning. He was able to build a dome to keep baseball fans out of the Texas heat, but he wouldn't have that luxury with his outdoor amusement park. Instead, he would employ 2,000 tons of central air conditioning, as well as 4 miles of plastic pipe, cooling shaded areas, waiting areas, picnic areas, as well as every building. This effort was 4 times greater than any other outdoor amusement park. This also included the world's largest underground chilled water system. On top of being state-of-the-art, Hofheinz said this park would appeal to everyone ages 3 to 103, a family amusement park owned by an entire family, the Hofheinz family. The judge was excited to build a park for his kids and grandkids to enjoy, and also reap the financial rewards. This is a project that he and his family had talked about for years, and he would have his 2 sons and daughter by his side. Early estimates pegged attendance at $1.6 million a year, bringing $25 million to the Houston economy, most of the money coming outside Harris County and even outside the state of Texas. Half of all guests were expected to come from outside the immediate Houston area. To accommodate all the out-of-town guests, Hofheinz was planning to build the world's largest motor hotel complex. This would be a $17 million project, the first phase being ready by June of 1968 and sporting 982 rooms, eventually having almost 1,500 rooms, the Astroworld Hotel being the star of the complex and standing 8 stories high. While this would help the new park, the judge really wanted to have this ready to attract the 1968 Democratic National Convention, being good friends with fellow Texan Lyndon Johnson. Johnson fought for the convention to be held in Houston, but having announced he wasn't going to run for re-election, Richard Daley convinced the president to hold the convention in Chicago. Guests could enter the park for one fixed price for adults, $4.50, and another for kids, $3.50. Those prices dropping by $1 by 7 p.m., the park being open from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., and the ticket granting access to all rides and shows. These shows would include acts from the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus, which the judge had just purchased at the end of 1967. By late December, Astroworld was 70% complete and right on schedule. Judge Hofheinz was seeing his star rise, getting credit for this burgeoning Astrodomain, something that was almost too good to be true for vacationing families. It'll be like moving Disneyland right into the Astrodome parking lot. Hofheinz has out O'Malley the Dodger Midas, Walter O'Malley, Tom Murray, the Baytown Sun. Baseball fans could take in a ball game while their families enjoyed the amusement park, and parkgoers wouldn't be able to leave the premises without seeing what Major League Baseball looks like under plastic. For Hofheinz, Astroworld wasn't only a great business opportunity, it was vital to make the Astrodomain work. He called it the key to success. This was because it cost $3 million to lease and maintain the Astrodome, $1 million more than the judge thought. Somebody has to pay the losses. That's why Astroworld is so vital, and that's the reason other cities don't jump on the covered stadium bandwagon. In February of 1968, the now $20 million park announced its grand opening would be June 1st. By early April, 12 of the 16 rides were either complete or being worked on, with opening day being just 2 months away. The 610 Limited Railroad received one of its 2 17.5-ton locomotives in late March, and it completed its first test run. It would travel 15 miles an hour around 1 mile of track, completing the circuit in 15 minutes, holding up to 320 passengers. On April 10th, with the park about 80% complete, the press was invited for a 3-day sneak preview. To get the full scoop on Houston's newest attraction, newspaper writers had to dodge mud puddles on the still unpaved walkways. The first sight of the Astroworld 57 acres of fun and pleasure makes you wonder, how will it be ready for the thousands of persons that will attend the June 1st opening? But then you stop and think, this is Houston and surely it will be opened. We had an opportunity to visit Six Flags Over Texas a while back and really enjoyed it, kids and all. But still, this new amusement park in the Astrodome complex is something that you really have to see to appreciate it. Mac Russo, the Morgan City Daily Review. Russo also noted Judge Hopkins' great foresightedness, and that the entire Astrodomain was a great expenditure that would not be paid off in his lifetime. And to keep the dome open daily cost around $3.2 million, so dollars must be poured into the kitty. Hopkins went on to say that June 1st would mark the start of Phase 1, but just wait until next year for Phase 2, then the next year for Phase 3, and there was so much more to come. At 57 acres, the park had lots of room to expand, although it was already bigger than the 6-year-old Six Flags Over Texas, and just a few acres smaller than Disneyland. At the end of April, just a month from opening day, general contractor DM Dozier was asked if they were still on for a June 1st opening. Yes, definitely yes. We really don't have a choice. Judge Hopkins says we'll be ready, and we will. Dozier admitted the final weeks were the most hectic, putting the finishing touches on the rides, buildings, and landscaping. Dozier had done lots of work for Hopkins in his Astrodomain, and over the past 9 months, he and his 650 men had gotten the park this far. It's hard to talk about Astroworld as one big project. It's a whole lot of little individual ones. The final month was spent staffing the park, finding 1,200 people to fill the roles, 1,000 of them expected to be college students from the Houston area schools. They would be dressed in bright uniforms with 25 different wardrobes, varying based on the area of the park the employees would be working. 2 weeks before opening day, the park had a very interesting delivery, a brightly colored 13.5-foot tall double-decker bus. This would be used to transport guests from the parking lot by the Astrodome over the bridge and into the park. This would only carry 57 guests at a time, so it had some help, including a Conestoga wagon, a 4-car tram train, and a cable car. Hopkins said, "We think our guests will get a big kick out of riding in some of these unusual vehicles. It probably will be the first time that a lot of us have been in some of these conveyances." But just a week before opening day, the park suffered its first tragedy. Thomas and William Jarrell were brothers from Pasadena, Texas, and they were both crushed under a 6,000-pound boat being set up for the Lost World adventure. Just 2 days later, the 1,200 employees gathered for their on-the-job training, receiving a pep talk from Judge Hopkins and General Manager Stan McIlvaney, and then went on to practice their roles for opening day. On Saturday, June 1st, 1968, the day had finally arrived. When guests entered the park in the morning, they would be greeted by a Sousa-type marching band, decked out in bright red. Moving down Main Street called Memory Lane and into the Americana section of the park, there would be a barbershop quartet, its members dressed in old-time police garb, giving directions when they're not singing. In Plaza Fiesta, there's a Mexican-style bandstand, flamenco dancers, folk singers, and other musicians. In the European Village, there was a 340-foot Skyrama, as well as Le Taxi, an antique cars-type ride featuring French taxis. Also, Mill Pond, an aero development bumper boat ride. Alpine Valley would be defined by one ride, Alpine Sleighs, also designed by Aero Development. The 65-foot mountain that houses Alpine Sleighs would cost $250,000, and it was the most sophisticated project in Astroworld. The mountain named after the founder himself, Der Hofheinsberg. You could also pick up the Astroway in Alpine Valley, the skyride that had a station here as well as Oriental Corner, spanning over 1,000 feet. That's where you could ride Black Dragon, an Everly monster flat ride, seating 48 riders at a time and spinning around while the arms move up and down. This would be entirely black, except for the yellow lights lining the arms. This is where you could also take in the karate and judo show. You could also pick up the 610 Limited train, an authentic replica of the 36-inch narrow-gauge train of the 1870s, having one station here in the Oriental Corner and the other in Western Junction. Over here, there was the Crystal Palace, an 800-seat theater for live performances, singers by day, magicians and dancers by night. Also, the Shooting Gallery, an electronic shooting gallery that was the first of its kind. Finally, there was one ride, the Wagon Wheel. This was a chance ride Strabant, a spinning flat ride that held 40 passengers. You could also take in a gunfighting show, rotating among 6 different storylines. The Lost World would feature one ride, Lost World Adventure. This was a well-themed boat ride with a tropical setting, telling the story of Professor A. Tittle Gooley. The ride passing by giant ants, man-eating butterflies, cannons, dragons, waterfalls, a geyser, culminating in the ruins of an ancient temple guarded by alligators. Modville would have 3 rides. The Happening, which was a scrambler flat ride. Spinout, which was another driving simulator, but unlike Le Taxi, which had French taxis, this had sports cars. And then there was the Astro Wheel, a double-arm Ferris wheel that allowed one side to be loaded but the other side was in motion. This would rise 90 feet in the air, painted crystal blue with green, blue, and orange capsules, and over 1,200 25-watt bulbs lighting up the whole ride at night. This also was the site of Astro Go-Go, a venue for live shows, and the Mod Circus with trampoline acts, jugglers, and unicyclists. Finally, there was Children's World with 4 main attractions. There was the Barnyard Petting Zoo, the Boot Slide standing 10 feet tall, the Maypole, which was a teacup ride, and Rub-a-Dub, the Aero Development Channel boat ride. This had riders floating in tubs in a 400-foot trough themed as a storybook. Kids would also be able to meet iconic characters like the Big Bad Wolf, Little Red Riding Hood, Humpty Dumpty, and animal characters that are park originals: Astroline, Astro Bunny, Mr. Bear, and Astro Kitty. Finally, at high noon, there would be a parade that would feature performers from all over the park, from cowboys to dragons. When asked what was next after opening, General Contractor D.M. Dozier replied, "A lot. As the judge has said, this is only the beginning." Astroworld, the wonderful world of fun, lives up to expectations. It is truly delightful family entertainment with a few new twists all its own. On June 1st, 1968, just before 10 a.m., Judge Roy Hoffhines unlocked his newest creation, Astroworld. 5 of his grandchildren threw an electric switch, starting the rides and releasing 2,000 balloons. Within 2 hours, 5,000 people had flooded into the park. 14 of the 16 rides were ready for opening day. The Alpine Sleigh was not one of them, not having been tested yet, and Mill Pond suffered a mechanical failure, along with 2 of its passenger cars arriving late. Still, by the end of the day, 23,406 people had passed through the gates. Some people enjoyed the park, noting the bright colors and calling it a colorful spot for amusement, but others weren't as impressed. One of those was Jerry Flemons of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. He noticed how the price estimate of the park fell over time, $20 million to $15 million, and the finished product was $10 million. It is almost as though the judge put a price tag on imagination. It shows, and the public is the loser again. He also accused Astroworld of being too similar to Six Flags Over Texas, but admits it's not a sin to copy success. Just that Astroworld is a poor imitation of Six Flags, and Six Flags' status as the #1 tourist attraction in Texas is in no danger from Astroworld. Critics were not the only problem the judge would have to deal with. The Astroworld plot was famously a mosquito-riddled swampland before it was redeveloped, and less than a month after opening day, guests were complaining the drainage was so bad the park was turning into a swamp. The shows also took a major turn after just 3 weeks of operation, getting rid of guns from their Western shows and the Bonnie and Clyde routine at the Crystal Palace. Park General Manager Stan McIlvaney said, "The action was taken to help de-emphasize violence in America in some way, promoting non-violence by eliminating unnecessary displays of violence." 1968 was a tumultuous year in America, Martin Luther King having been assassinated just 2 months prior, and the tipping point for park management may have been the assassination of Robert Kennedy, happening less than a week after the park opened. The gunfight show in the Western Junction was replaced by a 12-minute Medicine Man show, Astroworld being the first entertainment center to take action like this. Judge Hoffhines also used the Astros as a promotion for the park, making 4 September home games Astroworld specials, giving anyone who bought a ticket to the game $1 off admission to the park. As the summer ended and the park went to weekend-only operation, Hoffhines opened the park on Friday nights to feature new shows, trying to draw in teenage date night groups, saying that Astroworld had the finest date night type of entertainment facilities. September was also when the judge's Astroworld Motor Hotel complex began to materialize, the Sheridan Inn opening its doors for the first time, the Howard Johnson to follow in October, the Holiday Inn in November, and finally the flagship hotel, the 500-room Astroworld Motor Hotel, completing the biggest single hotel operation in the city of Houston. By the end of its first year, the park was featured in the small screen not once, but twice. First, there was a 28-minute documentary called Astroworld, The Wonderful World of Fun, tracing the park from its origins to its opening day. Then, there was The Pied Piper of Astroworld, a 1-hour special to be aired on ABC, starring Soupy Sales and the Muppets. The filming of this movie would shut the park down for a week in December. Afterward, Soupy's sales didn't seem impressed. When he was told that Astroworld was Roy Hoffman's answer to Disneyland, he replied, "If that's his answer, I'd love to know what the question was." The judge's son also made headlines by announcing his departure from Astro Enterprises. Fred Hoffhines had been a major partner in the Astrodomain, but he expressed his regret and said he wanted to explore new opportunities, and he could no longer be part of his father's ventures. Ultimately, the park's first year wasn't great, but it was far from a disaster. They drew over 1 million guests, but they were projecting 1.6 million. Park spokesman Wayne Chandler citing 37 days of rain as a major problem. That included 10 days in a row during the park's opening month. Still, they were expecting 1.5 million people to come into the park in 1969. When asked if Astroworld was similar to Disneyland, the judge replied, "It has the basic design format of Disneyland, and we plan to expand the park each year, as did Disney." 1969 would see $1 million in new attractions, including a 300-seat expansion of the Astro Go-Go Theater, a new circus tent in Children's World, new scenes on the 610 Limited Train and Lost World Adventure, and doubling capacity on the Alpine sleighs by tying two cars together. More significant, they added a renovated carousel from the turn of the century, known as the Denzel Carousel, named after the manufacturer. This would be under a 65-foot dome with a 13-foot arch. They also added an aerodynamics log flume called Bamboo Chute, and the park's first coaster, an aerodynamics junior coaster called Serpent. This would be one of their mini mine train models, the same one opening at Six Flags Over Texas and Six Flags Over Georgia that year. These new attractions in the Oriental Corner, plus the 4 million people that came to the Astrodome every year, plus the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey acts at the Astro Hall. This made the judge optimistic for the future, and he expressed his desire to expand Astroworld from 57 to 116 acres, as well as expand his hotel complex from 4 to 9 hotels. The all-in-one Astrodomain vacation was a dream that he was pushing hard, as he introduced a $10 combo ticket, getting into an Astro game, entry into Astroworld, a reserved seat to the circus, a tour of the Astrodome, and a souvenir book. Astroworld's second season kicked off with another push to hire 1,000 employees, putting out a flyer for attractive, well-groomed, enthusiastic young people. They were also looking for college-age entertainers, including singers, dancers, banjo players, and specialty acts, all invited to come audition at the Astroworld Hotel. They would try and join the Music Merchants, the Barbershop Quartet performing on Memory Lane, as well as the Crystal Palace Singers. They had just won a nationally televised talent show. These entertainers would be placed in every section of the park, putting on some kind of show or act pretty much the entire operating day. But they would not be working for General Manager Stan McIlvaney. He resigned his post after just 2 years. Having seen both his son and his GM depart the company, Judge Hoffhines was still heads down and moving forward. At this point, he'd invested $40 million into the Astrodomain, with the stated goal of establishing Houston as a tourist city. On August 3, 1969, Astroworld had its first major incident involving park gas. One of the sides of Astroreal came crashing to the ground. Witnesses estimated it was between 10 and 12 feet. Nobody was seriously injured, but 17 people were sent to the hospital. The crash also caused the second wheel to jam, trapping its riders at the top of the cycle, the fire department having to come and rescue the 31 riders. While the rides were having problems, the shows were as popular as ever. A survey showed the Crystal Palace was the top-rated attraction, followed by the Trinidad Syncopadders, the Glassblower, Over the Border Brass, the Medicine Man Show, and the Barnyard. For the fall, they introduced a new musical called Way Out West. The new general manager was Gene Patrick, and he described it as by far the best thing we've ever done. This got rave reviews. With a strong lineup of entertainment, Astroworld wanted to use the 1970 season to improve their ride collection. They would introduce their first thrill coaster, a Chance Rides toboggan called Swamp Buggy. This would be themed as a giant swamp tree, the car being lifted vertically inside of the tree and spiraling down, located on the new Fun Island in the middle of the park. Fun Island would also be home to the Wacky Shack, a tilted illusion house that uses angles to give the appearance of defying gravity. There would also be Barrel O Fun, a rotor ride, spinning so fast that it pins its riders to the wall while the floor drops to the ground. For the families, a seal pool was added to Children's World. They would also replace the Wonderful World of Fun slogan with a new one, We Make People Happy. Gene Patrick was projecting more than 1 million visitors for the year, and they were looking for any new angle to boost attendance. In May, the park was rented out by the Southern Gas Association, inviting 2,000 guests. It was the first time that Astroworld had hosted a private party, something that Gene Patrick was inviting companies to do. He wanted more private parties on weekdays in the spring and fall when the park was closed. All of their efforts paid off in 1970, as the park set a record by drawing in over 100,000 guests in one weekend in August, passing the 1 million mark by the end of the month. They would end up with 1.2 million. The 1 millionth visitor was Jimmy Johnson, and his whole family was given season passes, as well as an all-expense-paid weekend at the Astroworld Hotel. Gene Patrick had done well in his short time as general manager, but he decided to move on to work for a new firm building a new park in Charlotte, North Carolina. Judge Hoffheinz praised him for the tremendous job he has done in bringing the park to its present state of excellence. Hoffheinz would replace him with George Lanier Jr., an Astrodomain executive, and said that he should be able to make Astroworld an attraction worthy of 2 to 4 million persons a year. The judge, now 58 years old, had suffered a stroke in May of 1970, leaving him partially paralyzed on his left side. At this point, he decided to consolidate all his properties under the Astrodomain Corporation. This would include 4 subsidiaries, the Hoffheinz family being sole owner of each. But he appointed one man to be the new CEO, president, and chairman of the board, fellow Houston businessman Ruben W. Ascanas. Rumors started swirling late in the year that the Astrodomain was for sale, but the judge denied it. He still had the drive to run his company, his 16-hour days cut down to 12, using the rest of his time for physical therapy. His nurses saying his speech was flawless, and he was showing tremendous progress, months ahead of what was expected. But in the end, he would be confined to a wheelchair. Hoffheinz admitted the Astrodomain was touch and go financially over the last 5 years, but the lenders stayed with him and he felt like they turned the corner. We have done only about 1/4 of what we plan to develop at Astrodomain. What we need to do is keep moving. Because of our operation record, we can raise money for whatever we want to do here. But there were other factors threatening Hoffheinz's empire. Busch Gardens had opened up a brand new park in early 1971, right next to the Busch Brewery in Houston, 15 miles from Astroworld. This was a 40-acre park that had an Asian theme, animals, a boat ride, a railway, and it had the size and promise, but it proved to be unprofitable and closed down in 1973. On top of that, Senator Charles Wilson proposed a 10% entertainment tax, stating, "I basically like to tax things people can do without." Hoffheinz and his attorneys fought against it, saying it would reduce attendance at Astros games and put Astroworld further in financial danger, citing competition from parks opening in Louisiana and Walt Disney's new venture in Florida. Still, 1971 was poised to be the park's best year, expecting 1.5 million guests once again, and they set a single-day record of almost 20,000 people on Saturday, May 15th. The big addition for the year was the Orbiter, a retheme of their scramble ride, The Happening, enclosing it and adding effects. The Astrowheel would be back in operation after its accident in 1970. They would also extend their hours to 11 p.m. 6 days a week and midnight on Saturdays. New shows were planned for the Lagoon Pavilion, a stage right in the water, and a new show at the Crystal Palace called Salute to Baseball, featuring a replica of the exploding Astrodome scoreboard. Just 4 years into its tenure, Astroworld had become one of the South's biggest producers of live shows. 7 live bands were scattered around the 9 areas of the park, and the Crystal Palace was putting on 67 performances every week. Muhammad Ali even enjoyed a day at the park before a fight he had at the Astrodome. True to the judge's word, by the start of 1972, Astroworld announced a brand new area of the park, spanning 5 acres, a $1.5 million expansion called the Country Fair, the park's 10th themed area. This would take guests back to the era between 1880 and 1910, and it would be the first time the park expanded outside the 610 limited railroad tracks. But while this announcement was being celebrated, tragedy struck the park once again. On March 30th, a 49-year-old woman was killed on the Orbiter. The newly enclosed ride meant the guests would be looking for their seats in the dark. Being the first day of the park's operation, it was also the ride operator's first day, and the ride started while the woman was looking for a seat. Police said it would have been hard for the operator to see what was going on once the lights were dimmed. This was the first time a guest had been killed at the park. The park said there was no negligence by the operator, no equipment malfunction. It was just a very unfortunate accident. But that didn't stop a $765,000 lawsuit by the family against the park. The ride would remain open. As the summer rolled in, the Country Fair was finally open, the headline attraction being Dexter Freebish's electric roller ride, an aero development mine train, standing 80 feet tall and covering 2,900 feet of track. This ride and the park would be promoted later in the summer, as Houston DJ Jim Tate set a new world record by riding it 501 times in 24 hours. This beat the previous record of 465 rides set in 1968. The area also consisted of a Nickelodeon building, depicting the history of the automobile. Also a silent theater, showing some of the classic silent films from the early 1900s. An arcade music box pavilion, and a one-of-a-kind 1907 mirrored carousel, relocated to Astroworld from a country fair in Hanover, Pennsylvania. With the new themed area came the park's first price increase. Now $5.50 for adults and $4 for children. But for the kids, the park would unveil a new mascot, Marvel McVeigh, the ambassador of happiness. He would be accompanied by a crew of animal gypsies: Winston Wolf, 3 pigs named Quiz, Chiquito, and Harpo, Percy Penguin, Pierre Le Rat, Flopper Rabbit, Beethoven Bear, Samantha Skunk, Frida Frog, and Lester Lion. The park normally closed at the end of October, but for the first time in 1972, the park was open from December 26th to the 31st. All of the rides and attractions would be operational, with a new show at the Crystal Palace called Holidays. Judge Hoffines wanted the year to end with a bang, but he got more than he bargained for. On New Year's Eve, a fire erupted at the top of the Astroworld Hotel. 100 guests were seen fleeing from the rooms, including the judge and his family. The flames came pouring out of the 7th floor windows and into the 8th floor, causing $150,000 in damage. The culprit was a cigarette on the 7th floor suite, but when investigators found flammable liquid at the site, the suspicion turned to arson. Hoffines would need to repair the crown jewel of his hotel complex and get it ready for the 1973 season, the park taking a break of adding something new after opening the country fair the year before. Instead, the park would be getting a facelift. New facades, new artifacts, a re-gilding for the Astro Needle, restoring the Dencel Carousel, the water in the lagoon drained and cleaned, reworking the engines on the taxi and spin-out, and touching up the tram cars, the Black Dragon, and the 610 train. There would be one thing missing: the first ride to be removed from Astroworld, that being the Chance Rides Toboggan Coaster, Swamp Buggy. 1973 would also see Ruben Ascanas resign his post atop the Astrodomain Corporation. He said he would only be there for a year, but stayed 18 months, helping Hoffines secure a long-term financing program. This would be worth $38 million. The judge was appreciative of everything Ascanas did for the company, and the board elected him as the new chairman. 1974 would also be void of new rides, but park management knew that wasn't their biggest draw. That would be shows. They would build a brand new stage next to Skyrama, and that would be used to present the top name entertainers coming to the park that year. This included Jose Feliciano, kicking off the season on April 6, El Chicano on Cinco de Mayo, Bobby Goldsboro on Memorial Day weekend, and other name acts over the summer. Admission rising to $6.25 for adults and $5.25 for kids, and seating being on a first-come, first-served basis. This was a big success, as the park brought in over 1.5 million guests, and they drew some interest from one of their biggest competitors, Six Flags. They had approached Astroworld for a possible sale, the park worth somewhere between $20 and $35 million. As park official William E. McDonald said, Astroworld did not hang out a for sale sign, but if someone asked me to buy this $150 chair across my desk for $1,000, I'd sell it to him. At this point, Astrodomain was having major cash flow problems. This was because of declining attendance at Astros games, and their creditors were looking to seize control. Those creditors included Ford Motor Credit, General Electric Credit, and HNC Realty. They saw Six Flags knocking, and they saw it as a great opportunity to offload operational control to an experienced company. In May of 1975, the deal was done. Astroworld was now part of the Six Flags family. They had acquired a 20-year lease, the total price of the full term approaching $50 million. Six Flags president Ned DeWitt envisioned Astroworld as providing a different experience from Six Flags Over Texas. Texans and tourists will want to visit both parks because of their differences. On the Astroworld side, Astrodomain Executive Vice President Sidney Schlenker said, "In this time of rising interest rates, it is necessary at times to refinance certain obligations of a corporation that has large debt." Bill Crandall would take over as general manager, coming from Six Flags Over Texas and stating the park's name would not change. Astroworld will be completely different from the Six Flags in Arlington, so the people of Texas will want to visit both parks. As for Judge Roy Hoffines, he had officially lost control of the Astrodomain empire. Although Astroworld was doing well, the facility as a whole had a very problematic financial situation, prompting the lender takeover. For the first time, neither the judge nor his family had majority control over the Astrodomain. Hoffines' 3 children had met a week prior, and they decided to relinquish control of their holdings. The judge was still one of 3 people the lenders assigned to run the operation, along with Astrodomain President T.H. Nayland and Vice President Sidney Schlenker, but they were now responsible to answer to the lenders' wishes. Between the lenders at the top and Six Flags running Astroworld, there was a new sheriff in town, and the park was about to make some drastic changes. Never before in our industry has there been a greater need for a full day of wholesome, quality entertainment that allows the family to get away from everyday pressures. Dollar for dollar, theme amusement parks such as Astroworld provide one of the greatest entertainment values available today. By the middle of 1975, Judge Roy Hoffhines was still heavily involved in running his Astrodomain, but he was no longer calling the shots. The lenders had seized control, and they had leased Astroworld to Six Flags. The park opened in 1975 with Ed McMahon being the headliner, the NBC TV legend doing 2 shows a day for the park's opening weekend. The season was loaded with entertainment, including Kenny Rogers in the first edition doing a show in June. Six Flags wanted to hit the ground running, and 3 new rides would be unveiled for the 1975 season. This would include Der Fender Bender, a bumper car ride, the Red Baron, a kid's airplane ride, and Gunslinger, a chance rides yo-yo, better known as a swing ride. This would replace the Mill Pond boats. There would be $2.5 million in capital improvements going into the park over the next 2 years, with a broader plan to invest $16 million in capital improvements. This included more rain and shade structures, more rest areas, and more air conditioning. Six Flags also extended its hours even more, under the banner Magic Till Midnight, staying open till midnight every day between the 4th of July and Labor Day. Astroworld was valued at $40 million, and Six Flags was starting a 20-year lease of graduated payments starting at $1.5 million. This included the 60 acres of undeveloped land around the park, and with the option to renew the lease for 10 more years. Six Flags president Ned DeWitt said, "Houston is one of the best homes for an amusement park in the country. The city is large, affluent, and rapidly growing." In its first season with the Six Flags family, Astroworld set a new attendance record, up 15% over 1974, and revenues rising a whopping 43%. Six Flags had also been teasing a super secret announcement since the season started, and in October, they let the cat out of the bag.
Then maybe you'll have some idea what a Texas Cyclone will be like to ride. Compared to this, the Cyclone that terrified Coney Island was a breeze. The new Texas Cyclone at Astroworld.
Six Flags was about to make the most impactful addition in Astroworld's short history, a $2 million wooden coaster modeled after the world-famous Coney Island Cyclone. This Texas Cyclone would stand 93 feet tall, a few feet taller than the original, reach a top speed of 60 miles an hour, and cover over 3,100 feet of track. Bill Crandall said they did extensive research on the best coaster to add to Astroworld, and they were most impressed by the Cyclone. The Cyclone was the best and most exciting coaster out there, using its tight, compact structure to maintain the highest average speed of any coaster in the world. Initially, Six Flags wanted to buy the original and move it down to Texas, but Coney Island was unwilling to sell the landmark. Instead, they hired William Cobb to build the replica. Six Flags was encouraged by the new coaster coming to Six Flags Over Georgia in 1973, the Great American Scream Machine. That increased attendance at the park by 400,000 people. The Texas Cyclone would be part of the new Coney Island themed section of the park. This area would have the brand new Arena, an air-conditioned theater, featuring the Mark Wilson Magic Show during the day, and a musical tribute to America's bicentennial by night. Finally, the Black Dragon was transplanted to Coney Island, now using the name Razzmatazz. The Lost World also got a facelift, rethemed as the River of No Return. The 1976 season started with a lot of promise, but right after opening day, a 2-year-old girl was killed on the maypole, falling out of one of the teacups. The ride would be removed the following year. The Texas Cyclone would officially open on June 12th, and the reviews were beyond what they could have hoped for. Astroworld suddenly had a nationally renowned headline roller coaster. In the 1970s, possibly the most prominent coaster enthusiast in the country was Robert Cartmel, an art professor at the State University of New York. His top 10 list would make national news, including his piece for the New York Times in 1974 to find the best coaster in the world. In 1976, he had to make a revision to his list to add the Texas Cyclone. This would take his number 1 spot. The fine line that makes the Texas Cyclone number 1 is that it's more of a continual thrill. It's one thrill after another. Many consider the Texas Cyclone the greatest thrill ride built since the golden age of roller coasters in the 1920s. It will probably remain unchallenged until an amusement park is built on Mars. The park would continue its momentum into the 4th of July, launching a 13-night bicentennial celebration with parades and fireworks, each night celebrating a different American colony, and introduced the Horizons Theater. This would be equipped with a 180-degree screen. The park also set a record for the world's largest birthday card, having guests sign it and sending it to the White House to wish America a happy 200th birthday. Also new for 1976 was Super September, a month-long series of special weekend activities, and that sparked a 56% September attendance jump over the prior year. Under Six Flags, Astroworld had new life. Neighboring Six Flags took the then tired and somewhat faltering chick known as the Astroworld at Houston under its wing in May of last year. The chick just may grow up to be a hawk. When Six Flags took over the reins of the Astroworld, its image had begun to slip. No major attractions had been added for some time, and the park had evolved into a more regional attraction than a national tourist attraction. That's all changed. Perry Keith, the Shreveport Journal. By the end of summer, it was projected that attendance could double from 1975. That didn't quite happen. It was merely a 12% increase, but that was 12% over 1975's record numbers. Astroworld had a ton of momentum going into 1977, and Six Flags would continue pouring money into the park. Maudeville was rethemed as the International Plaza. They would expand Children's World to include the magical world of Marvel McFay, adding 6 new rides and a playground. Marvel McFay and his crew would also start promoting the park around town, making appearances at malls and other events in Houston. Astroworld would also build a 1,000-seat dome theater called Aqua Arena, with high divers, water skis, and a dolphin show called Aqua Frolic 77, bringing in Linda Carter, TV's Wonder Woman, to host the grand opening in late May. There would also be 6 new shows, a new games midway in the Coney Island section, and to further spruce up that section, tracer lights would be put on the Texas Cyclone that would light up as the train passed by. The Alpine sleighs added a new element, mountain people called the Alpies, and the River of No Return added a King Kong character that ruled over the lagoon waters. Bill Crandall anticipated a 22% attendance increase over 1976, but late in the summer, the ride that put the park on the map would put it back in the news. At around 11:35 a.m. on August 15th, a 15-year-old girl was thrown from the Texas Cyclone at the bottom of the first drop, suffering injuries to her skull and foot. The ride was shut down. Ride experts from Six Flags and the Philadelphia Toboggan Company were called in to investigate. After 3 days, no technical malfunction was found, and suspicion was that the girl was riding improperly, possibly trying to stand up on the first drop. Less than a week after the accident, Texas Cyclone was set to reopen, now with seatbelts and a lap bar safety chain. With the accident behind them, Astroworld focused on repeating the prior year's very successful Super September event, putting on different activities every weekend, starting with a salute to the 1950s featuring a rock musical, then Marvel McFay's Superstar Weekend, Daredevils, High Wire Cyclists, and finishing with a country and western weekend featuring the now solo artist Kenny Rogers. 1977 would be the final year for the former Black Dragon, the recently relocated Razzmatazz, replaced by the Chance Rides Flying Bobs called Whirling Dervish, but there would be a much bigger attraction on the way.
Speed sensors activated.
Slowly, you take your seat with the others, tensing slightly as the lap bar crosses your knees. Only a near-vertical ramp stretching 12 stories into the air can stop your forward motion. Brand new and ready to strike. At Astroworld.
In December 1977, Astroworld announced their big new ride for 1978, Grease Lightning. Built by the German manufacturer Schwarzkopf, this was their brand new shuttle loop model, using a flywheel to launch a train out of the station at 60 miles an hour, through an 80-foot vertical loop, up a 138-foot spike, and falling backwards to go through the loop again, through the station, up another big spike, and falling back into the station. It was said to offer more thrills per second than any other ride in the world. The looping coaster had been out of American life for decades, but Schwarzkopf and Aero Development had brought it back in the mid-70s, and models like this shuttle loop were flying off the shelf. Just upstate, Astroworld's sister park, Six Flags Over Texas, was getting their own Schwarzkopf double looper, Shockwave. There was no reason for Six Flags to be weary by adding a new major attraction to Astroworld. On top of having lots of room to expand, they saw what Texas Cyclone had done for the park. Word got out about the so-called #1 coaster in the world, and attendance was up 25% over 1976, reaching 1.7 million visitors. This made Astroworld the fastest growing major theme park in the country. That was saying a lot because there were a lot of new parks popping up all over the nation in the 1970s, many of them inspired by Disneyland and the new for 1971 Disney World. These attracted over 70 million people in 1977. With the addition of Grease Lightning, Astroworld was considered by some a thrill seeker's paradise, even with all the emphasis on live entertainment. 1978 would also bring in A Touch of Elvis, the South Pacific Review featuring dancers, and a month-long salute to Mexico. The park even introduced a late summer promotion, allowing a car up to 8 people to get in for $29.95, a possible savings of over 50%. Grease Lightning opened in late April and it was a big success. The only mishap that year didn't even happen at Astroworld. It was at Six Flags Over Mid-America in St. Louis. On their Skyway, a gondola fell 75 feet and killed 3 passengers, injuring a 4th person, and Six Flags shut down all their other ski lift rides during the investigation, including the Astroway. 23 million people had ridden it without incident up to that point, and after 3 months, it was given the green light to reopen. 1978 would, however, be the last for the park's rotor ride, Barrel o' Fun. At the end of the year, Six Flags, who was leasing Astroworld at that point, decided to buy the park outright. They were encouraged by the park's fourth straight record-breaking year, cracking the 2 million mark, almost 20% better than 1977, increasing attendance 100% over those 4 years. As optimistic as the park was at the end of 1978, 1979 would get off to a shaky start. Shortly after the park opened for the season, a 17-year-old boy was sneaking into the park, and he slipped and fell down an embankment, landing on the railroad tracks. The conductor saw what was happening and tried to stop the train, but it was too late. Another issue was the energy crisis caused by the Iranian Revolution. Production only dropped 4%, but the price of crude oil doubled. There were talks of shutting down gas stations on weekends, something the amusement industry as a whole fought against, knowing the lifeblood of their industry came on weekends. And, as Six Flags executive Richard Tyler said, 90% of our customers come to the parks by automobile. If people think they can't get gas, they won't drive. On the first weekend of July and into the Independence Day holiday, it was estimated that 90% of gas stations in Texas would be closed. That didn't stop Astroworld from advertising in Six Flags Over Texas's backyard. They were still taking out ads in Fort Worth, advertising that the Astrodomain was only 18 gallons away. Park officials were hoping that out-of-towners would be replaced by more locals, but by the middle of 1979, both Over Texas and Astroworld saw attendance drop by 7 to 8%. The park didn't have much new to offer for the 1979 season. They added the Showcase Lagoon grandstands and booked some major musical acts, like Chuck Berry, The Tramps, and Fats Domino. The park needed a boost going into 1980, and they would get it with the introduction of Thunder River. Built on the outskirts of the park behind Country Fair, this would be the world's only man-made whitewater raft ride. Riders would sit in a circle and traverse whirlpools, waterfalls, canyons, lakes, and rapids, the 2-ton boat moving up to 20 miles an hour. The idea came from General Manager Bill Crandall, watching the kayak races during the 1972 Munich Olympics, and thought there was no reason why they couldn't offer a whitewater experience the whole family could enjoy. The park contracted the Swiss manufacturer Intamin to get it done, and they made Crandall's vision come to life. This would cover 10 acres, covering 1,200 feet of river filled with 1 million gallons of water, being pushed by 2 massive 350 horsepower pumps and 10 underwater jets. It was billed as the most unusual and innovative ride in the theme park industry. The park would also open the Southern Star Pavilion, located right next to Grease Lightning in the back of the park. The theater being so close to the front spike, it caused the park to close the ride down during some of the showtimes. 1980 would end with the Fabulous 50s, featuring different 50s-style entertainment every weekend in November. One of the park's original icons would also be removed after being closed for a whole year, the Astro Wheel. The park would also lose a key figure that saw the park grow under Six Flags rule, General Manager Bill Crandall. He left the park after the 1980 season to pursue independent ventures, being replaced by Lamar Parker, having worked at the park for 5 years and the Six Flags Corporation for 12. Astroworld was queued up for a big year in 1981, replacing the Astro Wheel with a troika ride known as Warp 10, deemed as a space-age thriller. They also converted the Country Fair section to Nottingham Village, an Old English land depicting the era of King Arthur and Robin Hood. Dexter Freebish's electric roller ride would be rethemed in its new land, now known as Excalibur. Guests would enter Nottingham Village through the Sherwood Forest, walking over a cobblestone path, being immersed into a centuries-old land complete with games, restaurants, and shops. This would, however, be the last year for Der Fender Bender, the bumper cars within Nottingham Village. They would introduce a variety of new shows, including Razzmatazz, a vaudeville review, the Magic of Astroworld magic show, and big names coming to perform, like John Schneider from the Dukes of Hazzard and disco trio Sister Sledge. They would even host a whitewater kayak race on the Thunder River in July. When it was back in normal operation, guests might find the ride faster and more intense. Over the off-season, the weight of the boats was cut in half to speed them up throughout the course. On weekends in October, the park would introduce Oktoberfest. There would be live bands, all kinds of German sausages, German potato salad and red cabbage, Bavarian pretzels, funnel cakes, strudel, and of course, an ample supply of beer. This may have inspired their decision to sell beer at the park full-time, the first time in the park's 15-year history. The big addition for 1982 would be the Great Texas Longhorn Review, featuring computer-animated characters that can talk, sing, and dance, a state-of-the-art family show that utilized theatronics, combining theater with electronics. For the older crowd, Astroworld lined up some big acts to kick off their sizzling summer sound celebration, getting Sister Sledge to come back, along with Kool and the Gang, the Commodores, and Lionel Richie. For adults, the summer would also bring in a new show called Here's Hollywood, utilizing the Southern Showcase Theater. a grand salute to Hollywood stars, movies, and musicals. The park would also introduce different tiers of tickets, charging $12.95 to gain admission to all the rides and shows, or just a show pass for $9.95, not including all the rides. Astroworld was trying everything they could do to compensate for the bad economy, which park officials blame for a 3% drop in attendance the prior year, finishing the year with 1.8 million guests. They would bring back Oktoberfest, but only for a dance contest in September. Their main cultural event would be the Cajun Folklife Festival, targeting their Louisiana neighbors just across the state line. Crawfish, gumbo, oysters, boudin, and the raging Cajun Doug Kershaw for the live music. But by the end of summer, Astroworld was ready to make a major announcement. A brand new 15-acre water park built just east of the 610 train. This would be known as Waterworld. Although this $10 million park was attached to Astroworld, it would have its own separate gate. While the Astrodomain complex was growing, it lost its visionary. On November 21, 1982, at the age of 70, Judge Roy Hoffhines passed away. He was rushed to the hospital after an apparent heart attack, but he didn't make it. Having sold his shares of the Astrodomain in 1976 and selling the Houston Astros in 1979, he was no longer actively involved in the empire he found. But when you look out over the Astrodomain, the first major dome stadium in the Astrodome, the Astro Hall, the Astroworld Motor Hotel Complex, and Astroworld itself, it was all born from the mind of the judge. And although he was now gone, his legend would live on. The Shockwave, the Beast, the Colossus, Grease Lightning, Montezuma's Revenge, and the Barnstormer all have one thing in common. They are all roller coasters designed to provide amusement park customers with bigger and faster thrills. Roller coasters have become the fad of the moment.
See him dance and sing. You won't believe what surprises will spring. Where in the world but Astroworld can you have so much fun?
And so close to home.
In 1982, Astrodomain founder Judge Roy Hoffhines passed away. Although he was gone, the park he founded 14 years prior was thriving. Waterworld was coming to the Astrodomain, being placed on 15 acres of land just east of Astroworld, a $10 million park that would be separate from its neighbor. Its headline attractions would include Breaker Beach, an 815,000-gallon wave pool, Wipeout, two 60-foot-tall, 300-foot-long speed slides, Runaway River, an inner tube ride that swirls down 35 feet, and Squirt Splash, a children's area. The water park would also have an 18-hole miniature golf course, but that wasn't all. Astroworld would not be left out. They were introducing the Skyscreamer, a $2.5 million drop tower built by Intamin AG, the same ride Six Flags Over Texas received a year prior. Passengers would sit 4 across in a gondola, back into an elevator lift, rising up 128 feet at 10 feet per second. That's about 3 times faster than a normal elevator. It would reach the top, push the gondola out over the track, and drop it down 100 feet, reportedly pulling negative 3.5 Gs on that fall. The track levels out, and the riders are looking at the sky before it lowers back into the station. Astroworld General Manager Lamar Parker called it the smartest thrill ride ever built. 10 years ago, it would have been technically impossible to build. The computer safety systems engineered into the ride are state-of-the-art devices. Safety is paramount, and that's why Waterworld employed 120 certified lifeguards. But on July 12, 1983, Waterworld suffered its first fatality. At 2:15 p.m., a 7-year-old girl was spotted by a lifeguard at the bottom of the pool and was pulled out, but she passed away just an hour later. At the end of that same month, tragedy struck again, this time behind the scenes. On July 29th, at 11:15 p.m., 2 employees on the Texas Cyclone gave the signal, clear to dispatch. They didn't know the track had not been returned from the load position to the run position. When that train was dispatched, it rolled backward into a storage shed and off the track, 3 of the 4 cars falling 14 feet to the ground, crushing a 22-year-old employee to death and injuring 3 others. The death was ruled an accident and caused by human error. Lamar Parker said the backup safety mechanism that would have prevented this did not work, and that was because a small wooden board had been jammed into it. The board sent a false signal that the track was in the correct position. The park would rectify this by replacing the current braking system, as well as install bumpers at the end of the storage shed. Less than a month later, the Category 2 hurricane, Alicia, struck the Gulf Coast of Texas. Astroworld escaped the brunt of it, but they prepared by dumping all their lawn furniture into swimming pools. This would keep them from becoming flying missiles. 1983 was a bittersweet year of major additions and major incidents, and at the end of the year, they would bid farewell to several attractions. Alpine Sleighs was their biggest ticket ride when the park opened in 1968, and now it was being replaced. Same with another park original, Le Taxi. Its cars were moved over to spin out and the ride was renamed Antique Taxis. Finally, Whirling Dervish, the Flying Bobs, was removed, but it was replaced with another ride also called Whirling Dervish, this one being a tilt-a-whirl. The River of No Return would not be removed, but it would be renamed the River Ride and become an educational attraction. The park also said goodbye to the Boot Slide and the Barnyard Petting Zoo. The other rides were removed so they can build the Enchanted Kingdom, this replacing the Children's World. This was touted a multi-activity recreational area for kids 3 to 10, combining learning and exercise with playtime. This included an introduction to use a computer. Texas Instruments set up this display, 20 computers total, each one valued between $4,000 and $5,000. The main attraction would be Discovery Mountain, the mountain once used by the Alpine Sleighs. This had multiple features, including a shadow room, using strobe lights to keep shadows on the wall after the person is moved away. Also, the musical tone hallway, where guests can step on lights on the floor to make different sounds. And the body tracer, using computer graphics to capture and display visitors' image on the wall. Its design was to combine education and entertainment. The kids were taken care of, but there was something great for the adults also. To celebrate the 100th anniversary of the invention of the roller coaster, Astroworld would add a brand new one, this one known as XLR8, or Accelerate. This would be an aero-suspended coaster, a model they tried 3 years prior at Kings Island, but had just closed down because of design flaws. They had gone back to the drawing board, and Astroworld was confident enough in their corrections to buy one for the 1984 season. It was meant to give a free floating sensation, being in an airplane and doing tight turns, gliding over land and water and quietly touching down as the ride ends. This would cost $3.2 million, standing 81 feet tall, topping out at 34 miles an hour, and covering 3,000 feet of track, all while the train was hanging and swinging under the track. It was a large year of investment for the park, appealing to people of all ages, and they enjoyed a 12% increase in summer attendance over the year prior, topping 2 million people. Lamar Parker said these new attractions, plus increased awareness of the magnitude of Waterworld. That's making the Astroworld parks a destination for out-of-town visitors. Drawing people outside of Houston was important for the bottom line, and up to this point, they hadn't had much competition outside of Six Flags Over Texas. But right as the season ended, there was a major announcement coming out of San Antonio. Harcourt Brace Jovanovich, the publishing firm that operated 3 SeaWorld parks nationwide, was set up to invest $75 million and build a 500-acre park called SeaWorld of Texas. This would be much bigger than Six Flags Over Texas and Astroworld, and would be expected to bring in 3 million people each year. With a new major competitor on the horizon, Astroworld had some more immediate problems to deal with. On June 17th, 2 trains on the 610 Limited Railroad collided. One train was stalled, and because of a communication failure, the other train rear-ended it, sending 8 people to the hospital. The engineers are supposed to clear a 2-way radio signal before moving to the next stop, but the engineer on the second train thought he had clearance. Moving at 10 miles an hour, it came around the corner, saw the other train parked in the station, put on its brakes, but it was too late. After this incident, the park installed electronic I-beams to prevent this from ever happening again. As 1984 came to a close, the park's longtime mascot, Marvel McFay, would be retired. He was replaced by Bugs Bunny and the Looney Tunes characters. That year, Six Flags acquired Great America in Gurnee, Illinois, and part of that purchase included the rights to use the properties of Time Warner and Warner Brothers. The Looney Tunes characters would flood into all the Six Flags parks, the existing mascots being pushed to the side. In 1985, Bugs would be joined by the Chinese acrobats for the entire summer. Their act of hoop diving, acrobatics, tumbling, juggling, leaping, and balancing was said to be unlike anything seen by a Western audience. On June 9th, the park suffered another fatality, this one once again in Waterworld. A 30-year-old woman drowned in the wave pool. Lifeguards noted it seemed like she was having seizures at the time that she went under. Her husband pulled her out, but she died an hour later at the hospital. The husband would sue the park a month later, saying the park should have been prepared for emergencies like this. Back at Astroworld, the river ride would be rethemed as Wetlands, the Water's Edge. The ride that was originally The Lost Adventure had gone through numerous changes over the years, and now it would be an educational ride, teaching its riders about the importance of the wetlands. The Southern Star Amphitheater would also start bringing in some major acts, like the Grateful Dead, as a live music craze swept all the American theme parks, targeting a crowd that wouldn't be interested in thrill rides or family attractions. Despite not adding anything major, the prior investments over the last 2 years were still paying off. Park management gave credit to the Chinese acrobats and the arrival of Bugs Bunny to the complex setting a new attendance record, a combined 2.5 million people visiting both parks. At the end of the 1985 season, Lamar Parker stepped down as general manager, replaced by Del Holland, and he was excited to announce everything new coming in 1986. The headline attraction would be the Looping Starship, initially planned to be named the Challenger, but after the accident earlier in the year, it changed to the more generic name. This would swing riders back and forth until reaching the 84-foot apex, completing 360-degree loops. This would replace Warp 10. They would also bring in the Studio A Dance Club and Fright Night's Halloween event to give the young adults and teenagers something new to sink their teeth into. For the kids and families, they would bring back another Chinese acrobatic group called Chung King and introduce a new show for the Enchanted Kingdom, the Bugs Bunny Circus. The park continued to thrive, reporting a 20% increase in attendance. Playing off their new Fright Nights event, the park would introduce a creepy new show for the 1987 season, A Midsummer Night's Scream, a 30-minute illusion show. After taking a year off, Warp 10 would re-emerge as Warp 2000, being located in Plaza de Fiesta, next to the Wetlands ride on the other side of the park. This would also be the final year for this park original, being removed for something new the following year. The park as a whole got a big facelift over the off-season, paving streets, installing new restaurants, and setting up new shows, including the US high diving team at the Lagoon Theater. For 2 weeks in June, kids could enjoy the Kids Festival, with balloon makers, stilt walkers, clowns, face painting, games, and free cake, along with the world's largest sundae celebrating Daffy Duck's 50th anniversary. The Texas Cyclone would also look different in 1987, sporting sleek, state-of-the-art Morgan trains for its 10th anniversary. And even 10 years after its debut, coaster connoisseur Robert Cartmel still ranked at number 1 overall. In the fall, the park would host the Country Jamboree, featuring shows and music from major country artists like Reba McEntire and the Judds. They would also bring back their popular Fright Nights for the Halloween season, posting a 5% increase in attendance overall. At the end of the season, they tore down the Wacky Shack, turning it into a season pass processing center. In 1988, Astroworld's new competitor hit the ground running, or should I say, swimming.
It is finally here, the opening of SeaWorld of Texas, simply the biggest marine theme park in the world. And take a look at the crowds that came out today. Thousands of people flocking to see Shamu and Friends as SeaWorld of Texas opened its doors today.
When SeaWorld of Texas opened in San Antonio, it had a price tag of $140 million and covered 250 acres, the nation's largest marine theme park, and it was set to be open year-round. Some experts believe that SeaWorld would not hurt the Six Flags parks in Texas. In fact, it would help them. This park completed the Texas Triangle, connecting Houston, Dallas-Fort Worth, and San Antonio, and more tourists than normal would come to Texas and experience all 3 parks. We Texans had better face the fact that tourism is an industry whose time has come. We have sat back and been dependent on oil and agriculture and haven't needed tourism. And now, all of a sudden, we need it. And we need to market Texas intelligently. Larry Todd, director of the Texas Tourist Agency. SeaWorld was also a very different park than Astroworld, focusing on marine life and not rides or even the types of shows that Astroworld offered. By the end of the summer, this came to fruition, and park officials credited SeaWorld for drawing in people who were extending their vacations, making the 215-mile journey east. They finished their first year with an astounding 3.3 million visitors. 70% of the people pouring into Astroworld came from the Houston area. The other 30% came from 300 miles away or further, so anything bringing people to Texas was good for the park. Meanwhile, Astroworld was celebrating its 20th anniversary, introducing Tidal Wave, a shoot-to-shoot water ride where riders would load into 16-passenger boats, rise up a 65-foot lift hill and plunge down, creating a 20-foot wall of water. For senior citizens, the park brought back the Country Jamboree in the fall, and once again, Fright Nights for Halloween, featuring Freddy Krueger from A Nightmare on Elm Street. But it was a real nightmare that came to the park. On October 22nd, around 11:30 p.m., A 19-year-old was shot in the mouth and was taken to the hospital in fair condition. This was the first shooting in Astroworld's history. There were 27,000 people in the park for the first Fright Night when the shooting occurred. There were over 100 security guards on duty, and for the rest of Fright Nights, it was increased by 20, searching bags at the entrance, and capping attendance going forward at 20,000 people. Still, these seasonal events proved to be very popular, and at the end of the year, they introduced the very first holiday in the park. This would run daily between Christmas and New Year's, where guests could enjoy ice skating, sledding down Santa's snow hill, and 5 shows to make up for most of the rides not being operational. The park kept driving forward with major additions into 1989, introducing Viper, a Schwarzkopf looping star. This would not be a new creation. It came from something new Six Flags had introduced in the mid-1980s, the Ride Rotation Program. This served 8 seasons at Six Flags over Mid-America as Jetstream, being dismantled and moved south to Astroworld. Riders would board the train, rise up 80 feet, diving into a tunnel called the Viper Pit, into a vertical loop, and twisting around almost 2,000 feet of track. The ride was made to be portable, transplanted on a small plot of land in the oriental section of the park. For those who couldn't stomach the new Viper, Astroworld also brought in a new show called Stars of the USSR, a Russian troupe performing folk songs and dances. Del Holland said, "We, as a nation, have a curious appetite to discover what makes the Russian people tick. In our travels to Russia to put this show together, we discovered there is an incredible sense of pride incorporated in Russian dance and music. It is truly an incredible performance." The Stars of the USSR was popular along with Viper, helping overcome the drop in attendance due to bad weather. This was coming from Tropical Storm Allison and Hurricane Chantal. By the end of 1989, Six Flags Over Texas was already building the world's largest wooden coaster, the Texas Giant. Not to be outdone, Astroworld spokeswoman Deborah Ford hinted at something new coming at the turn of the decade. All she would say is, "It's gonna be a great thrill ride." There will be no other ride like it in the world when Ultra Twister, Astroworld's new revolution in roller coasters, twists and moves March 10th at the opening of the 1990 season. That was the pitch from the park for their new Togo Ultra Twister, a coaster without any turns, just a straight line from front to back, located on the western edge of the park. Guests would climb up 92 feet, drop straight down at 85 degrees and pop back up, going into a 360-degree rotating turn forward. It would then hit a transfer track to dip down below, sending the train backwards, and it would do 2 more rotating turns before the ride ended. Unlike a normal coaster, where the track is either above or below the rider, the track would encompass the rider on all sides. Like Viper, this was not an Astroworld original. This operated as Six Flags Great Adventure for 3 seasons starting in 1986, featuring a vertical lift that was changed to a 45-degree angle once it was moved. This ride's design mimics aerobatic stunts, but even fighter pilots can't do barrel rolls backwards. Janet Wilson, Austin American Statesman. For the kids, the park would have a season-long celebration of Bugs Bunny for his 50th birthday, adding 2 new shows in honor of Bugs, and offering kids admission for half of the adult price. 2.3 million people came through the gates during the summer season, a 17% spike over the prior year. The park continued to tweak its popular Fright Nights, adding 2 new haunted houses, A Scream in the Dark and Dungeon of the Mysterious. They also extended their Holiday in the Park event, initially lasting the final week of the year, now having a 25-day schedule from Thanksgiving to New Year's Eve. 1990 also marked the end of the Studio A Dance Club, serving the park for just 4 years, and the Whirling Dervish, the tilt-a-whirl in the Coney Island section of the park. This plot of land would be used for the park's new for 1991 edition, the Condor, a Huss Condor. Riders would sit in 28 bird-shaped cars, rise up 60 feet, and swing around while spinning. This was also a recycled ride, this time from Six Flags Magic Mountain, and before it even opened, the park announced it would be removed after the 1991 season, heading off to its next stop. To add to the thrill, the park would also partner with the Houston Zoo, putting on an endangered species display inside the ride house, featuring the California and Indian condors, giving the ride an educational angle. Following the theme of offering something for everyone, the park would also introduce Blast, the most elaborate and unique puppet show in the world, featuring a cast of 175 marionettes and life-size celebrity puppets. After Fright Nights and Holiday in the Park were over, there would be 2 developments that would prove to be pivotal in the future of Astroworld. In the last week of the year, Time Warner bought Six Flags. Wesray Capital was the current owner, buying the chain from Bally Manufacturing in 1987, and from that sale, they were still $610 million in debt. Time Warner, the Blackstone Group, and Wertheim Schrader would infuse $150 million into the company, and this cut down the threat of bankruptcy. Time Warner and Six Flags saw this marriage as mutually beneficial, as Time Warner's dollars would stabilize the chain's finances, and the Six Flags parks could promote Time Warner's characters, most notably those from DC Comics. The other development came in early 1992, when San Antonio opened another major theme park, Fiesta Texas. This was owned by USAA, built inside a 100-foot quarry wall, and unlike SeaWorld in the same city that was a marine park, this would be a park in the same vein as Astroworld. In fact, it would open with the world's tallest, fastest, and steepest wooden coaster, the Rattler. This would also feature themed areas and shows, costing $100 million and covering 200 acres. When SeaWorld opened 4 years prior, it was seen as a positive development for Astroworld. But the events unfolding at the end of 1991 into 1992 would prove to be the beginning of the end. My alarm clock goes off. I hop out of bed and run into my mom's room. Today's the day I finally saved enough money so we could go to Astroworld. I run to the ticket booth and then we run inside. But what you thought probably didn't happen. I spot nobody in the whole theme park but us. I'm talking no lines anywhere. For the rest of the day, we ride and ride. This is a time I will never forget. As 1991 came to a close, Astroworld was under new ownership. Time Warner had just become the majority shareholder of the Six Flags Corporation, and they were looking to push some of their properties in the parks. Also, a big new amusement park was poised to open in San Antonio called Fiesta Texas. Unlike SeaWorld in the same city, this would have thrill rides, including the world's largest wooden coaster. But, as park management stated when SeaWorld opened back in 1988, anything driving Texas tourism is good for Astroworld. Condor was removed after the 1991 season as planned, and it would be replaced by Adventure Rivers of Texas. This would be a raft ride inside an enclosed tube, twisting around 750 feet, starting at a height of 60 feet. This would have 4 chutes, each one themed to a different Texas river: the Brazos, Colorado, Red, and Rio Grande. There would also be audio in the queue teaching park guests about the history of these rivers. This ride would be designed by the former general manager of the park, back when it was first leased by Six Flags, Bill Crandall. For the first time in its history, guests buying a season pass for Astroworld could use that pass to get into any Six Flags park in the country. This was a big draw for season pass sales in the spring, driving up business by 20% by Memorial Day weekend. As the summer officially kicked off, Six Flags parks around the country launched their Batman Summer Spectacular, Astroworld premiering Batman Nights, a state-of-the-art pyrotechnics display with riveting special effects, displaying a battle between Batman and the Joker. With the economy tight once again, more Texans were staying close to home, and that was given credit for a 10% increase in attendance by the end of the summer. As the 5th annual Holiday in the Park event was in full swing, Astroworld was ready to unveil their next headline coaster.
Now's the time to stand up to the challenge of Batman the Escape, because when summer winds down, the fun picks up. Batman the Escape. Experience it now, only at Astroworld, the Houston Six Flags theme park.
For the park's 25th anniversary, they would be getting this intimate stand-up coaster called Batman the Escape. It stands 90 feet tall, covers 2,300 feet, and goes through one inversion, a vertical loop. This would be located in the European Village, in the back corner of the park behind Enchanted Kingdom. Discovery Mountain would be repurposed as the Batcave, serving as theming for the ride. And that wouldn't be all. Riders would also walk through Arctic Park under control of the Penguin, as well as Gotham City Cold Storage, using the theme to keep people cool. As was the case for the last 2 coasters, Batman would be relocated from a different park. Just like Ultra Twister, this one served 3 seasons at Great Adventure after serving 3 years at Magic Mountain, using the name Shockwave at each of its previous locations. New park president Bill Moore said, "The backing and influence of Time Warner has helped us raise fantasy entertainment to a whole new level at Astroworld. From its theme, to its storyline, to the ride itself, It was described as a total sensory experience. As for the rest of the park, their new season of shows included the interactive Dennis the Menace screen test, the Incredible Acrobats of China, and Legends in Concert. In October, the park would rename its Fright Nights event as Fright Fest. Astroworld was the only park in Texas to see an increase in attendance in 1993, jumping 10% to 2.2 million. The new Fiesta Texas seeing a 200,000 guest decline in its sophomore year, down to 1.8 million. It was at this time that USAA expressed their intention to sell the park. The insurance company was looking for someone more experienced to run the park, and Time Warner was being thrown around as a potential buyer. The park cost $100 million to build, but could sell for as high as $200 million. The 1994 season wouldn't see any major additions to Astroworld, adding a Police Academy stunt show and Bugs Bunny Land, an area exclusively for young kids. Nobody over 54 inches could ride the rides. There would also be a new restaurant and theater in Nottingham Village called the Sword and Crown, featuring King Arthur's Court, a live show with jugglers, jesters, knights, and musicians. They would also welcome in big-name acts like Reba McEntire, the B-52s, and Selena. Behind the scenes, they were gearing up for their next big project, a new indoor coaster called Mayan Mindbender. This would be the only enclosed coaster in Texas, taking riders into an ancient temple from a lost civilization where secrets have remained hidden until now. It would be a well-themed experience, with carved serpents, an ominous sculpted head with glowing eyes, and an overturned vehicle from an earlier, unsuccessful mission. The park would also boast this as their 10th coaster, more than any other park in Texas and third most in the world, considering Skyscreamer a coaster for this claim. Mayan Mindbender would be set in a 70-foot temple, but the ride would only stand 28 feet tall, covering just over 1,100 feet of track. Like their last 3 coasters, this would be relocated from another park, this one coming from Boblo Land in Canada. There, it was also an indoor coaster called Nightmare, and Six Flags bought the ride once Boblo Land shut down in 1993. This was definitely a family-friendly ride, but their other new addition for 1995 was not. This was Barnstormer. Built by Sky Fun 1 Incorporated, this was a 151-foot sky coaster, where riders could strap into a harness, rise to the top, and free fall to the ground, using bungee cords to swing back and forth. This would be an upcharge attraction, so riders would pay an additional fee on top of park admission. The kids wouldn't be left out either. They would introduce Fright Fest for kids. This would offer kids a hayride through Waterworld, trick-or-treating, new shows, haunted houses, face painting, and for guests under 54 inches, they could wear their costumes and get a free ticket to return to holiday in the park. Meanwhile, Time Warner had been in charge for 4 years, and now they were looking for a change. They wanted to reduce their debt load, having taken the full stake of the chain in 1993, and now they were selling 51% of the shares to an investment group led by Boston Ventures. They would retain a 49% stake in the company, serving as co-manager of the 10 Six Flags parks. But that 10 was soon to be 11. By the end of 1995, Time Warner was in negotiation with Fiesta Texas, and by the early days of 1996, the deal was done. Six Flags was now the operator of the 200-acre San Antonio park, giving it control of 3 major parks in Texas. This would be a 10-year deal, and gave Six Flags the option to buy the park. Back at Astroworld, 1996 was a light year of additions. They introduced the Batman Forever water stunt show, where Batman and Robin would battle the Riddler and Two-Face, and their spring breakout would feature extreme sporting events, like the slam dunk obstacle course, human foosball, and a bungee run. They would also add headrests on the Texas Cyclone, this following a lawsuit from a 16-year-old boy. He said his neck was whipped so badly he ruptured a vein, sending a blood clot to his brain, causing paralysis. The biggest battle of the year would come from their gun policy. They installed metal detectors across multiple parks, and banned guns from the parks, even for off-duty police officers. This caused the police chief of Houston to cancel work permits for dozens of officers moonlighting at Astroworld. He said it's department policy for all officers to carry their weapons at all times, regardless if they were on duty. A police group in San Antonio even urges officers to boycott Six Flags over the policy. Under pressure from police departments across the state, and under threat of legal action, Six Flags backed down, exempting off-duty officers from the gun ban. In 1997, the one major park in Texas not owned by Six Flags would break into the coaster scene. SeaWorld would introduce Great White, a B&M inverted coaster, promising to drive some competition from its Texas neighbors. Not to be outdone, Astroworld was unveiling their new monster. This was Dungeon Drop. They had gotten Skyscreamer 14 years prior. That was a first-generation Intamin drop tower. This would be the second generation, standing 230 feet tall and employing a state-of-the-art braking system. Using magnetic induction, the cars would slow down very smoothly, and no moving parts were needed. The cars would be open air, the guests' feet dangling, adding to the feeling of danger. Leading up to the ride, the queue would be themed as a medieval adventure, including chambers representing Merlin's laboratory, the king's armory, and the dungeon, and at that point you would board the ride. This brand new drop tower would be the tallest thrill ride in Texas, and it would overshadow the Skyscreamer, that being dismantled at the end of the year. Dungeon Drop was the high point of the year for Astroworld. In August, a mechanic was killed after being struck by one of Excalibur's trains. He had apparently acknowledged an all-clear sign warning employees to stay away from the track, but he was still putting oil on the track when the train came passing by. Attendance would slip in 1997, down 13% to 2.1 million, the park blaming it on a rainy tourist season. But there was something that would be brought to light by the end of the year, as some of the Six Flags parks started questioning how Time Warner was running the show. First, there was a limited partnership that owned Six Flags Over Texas, and they accused Time Warner of spending too much time marketing their characters and not investing in thrill rides. Second, there was another limited partnership that owned Six Flags Over Georgia, and they accused Time Warner of starving the park of big attractions, playing favorites with their parks for the biggest markets: Magic Mountain, Great Adventure, and Great America. One of the focal points was the Batman the Ride coasters, being introduced to those three parks in 1992, 1993, and 1994, with Over Georgia having to beg for theirs in 1997. The partnership accusing Six Flags of holding the ride hostage, not giving in until they agreed to a new management contract. Six Flags Over Texas was yet to receive the ride. This also produced a report showing how much Time Warner invested in each park since they took over in 1991. Magic Mountain led the pack with $35 million. Then Great Adventure with $29 million, Great America at $25.5 million, Six Flags Over Mid-America with $19 million. Then the two parks making noise, Over Texas at $17.5 million, and Over Georgia at $14.2 million. At the very bottom, the park that had been receiving hand-me-downs from other parks. It was Astroworld, $13.1 million. Just months after the finger-pointing began, Time Warner would sell Six Flags Theme Parks Incorporated. On April 1st, 1998, the deal was done. The company was now in the hands of Premier Parks, an Oklahoma City-based chain that dates back to 1982. They would pay $1.86 billion and add the Six Flags parks into their existing portfolio. This included parks like Marine World in Vallejo, California, Elitch Gardens in Denver, Colorado, Frontier City in Oklahoma City, Kentucky Kingdom in Louisville, Geauga Lake in Ohio, Great Escape in New York, Riverside Park in Agawam, Massachusetts, and Adventure World near Washington, D.C. This would catapult them to the number 2 theme park operator in the country, just behind Disney. Premier Parks was aggressive, and the Six Flags chain was about to be taken for a ride. Entering the park's 30th anniversary in 1998, the Horizons Theater was gone, but yet another coaster was on the horizon. Taz's Texas Tornado would be the 3rd Schwarzkopf coaster brought to Astroworld. Similar to its neighbor Viper, it would be a compact and portable looping coaster, standing 115 feet tall, covering almost 3,700 feet of track, and featuring 4 vertical loops. This yellow, white, red, and blue coaster was a marvel to look at. Like their previous 4 coasters, this would be relocated, starting on the German Fair Circuit, moving to Sweden's Gröna for a year, and finding its way to Houston as Astroworld's new star ride. Guests would enjoy Taz's Texas Tornado in 1998. There were just fewer of them. Attendance was down 9% from the prior year, finishing at 1.9 million. To make it worse, 3 of the park's attractions would not survive the end of the year. First, the Batcave would be shut down. The walkthrough attraction linked to the queue of Batman the Escape, the mountain that used to be used for the Alpine Sleighs and Discovery Mountain. Second, the Adventure Rivers of Texas would be removed after just 7 seasons. Finally, the park's first major coaster would be removed. Excalibur was finally being retired after 27 seasons, but there was a good reason for this. Astroworld would be in line for yet another new coaster. Serial Thriller would be a suspended looping coaster built by Vekoma, a model that Six Flags hadn't explored up to this point, but something Premier Parks was very familiar with. This would stand 109 feet, cover 2,260 feet of track, and traverse 5 inversions. Unlike their previous 5 coasters, this would be an Astroworld original, built from the ground up. That was a promising sign. Premier Parks investing some money into Six Flags' least fortunate park of the 1990s. They would be spreading around $200 million for its 25 properties, this including Fiesta Texas, which they had just bought outright, and they would be getting a Premier Rides launch looping coaster called Poltergeist. Six Flags Over Texas would be getting a $14 million investment, the largest in their history, getting a new Gotham City-themed area and finally receiving their Batman the Ride coaster. Premier Parks wasn't only building up their parks, they were continuing to expand, this time internationally, buying parks in Europe and Mexico. Waterworld would also benefit from the generosity of Premier Parks, adding a 5-story, 40,000 square foot interactive play structure, this being called Hook's Lagoon. Reportedly priced in the millions, this would have dozens of hands-on activities, and a 1,000-gallon bucket of water would tip over every few minutes. They would also welcome Big Kahuna, a 6-person family raft ride. The year, the century, the millennium was coming to a close, and the park would be parting with one of its landmarks, a park original, the Astro Needle. The observation tower that opened as Skyrama stood 340 feet tall, and it would be dismantled and moved to the newest Premier Parks edition, Six Flags Mexico. Another landmark was on its way out, the whole reason the park was constructed in the first place, the Astrodome. As future Hall of Famer Craig Biggio said, the Astrodome is like an old car. It's dependable, it's reliable, it still gets you to work every day, even though it may make a lot of noise along the way. After 35 seasons, the Houston Astros were saying goodbye to their home, leaving for a state-of-the-art new stadium in downtown Houston 7 miles away. The Dome would remain and still host events, but it would no longer host 81 baseball games during the spring and summer, drawing less attention to Astroworld. While the Astro Needle and the Astros were being taken away, Astroworld would gain a new competitor. In 2000, New Orleans introduced Jazzland, a 50-acre park opening with 30 rides. Being so close to Louisiana, Astroworld had drawn so many tourists from the Pelican State over the years, but now they had another strong option to spend their money. 2000 and 2001 were very quiet years for the park. They were part of the chain-wide partnership with Univision to bring Festival Latino to multiple parks. They brought in some big names like Mandy Moore and Destiny's Child, and they introduced Fastlane in 2001. This was a system fashioned in the image of Disney's FastPass, allowing guests to reserve a time to ride some of the park's biggest rides and avoiding the line. Through the 2001 season, attendance remained stagnant at 1.8 million. Just a few years prior, they were almost hitting 2.5 million guests. New coasters added in 1998 and 1999 didn't move the needle. It continued to sink, and that may have driven Premier Parks away from investing more into the park. This was an era where Premier Parks added over 20 coasters to the parks in 1999 and 2000, and continued that spending spree into 2001. All the while, Astroworld seemed to be written out of those plans. To make things worse, Taz's Texas Tornado, renamed just Texas Tornado after its first season, had major problems and could never operate consistently. It got new trains, but they couldn't get them to be operational. The ride would never reopen. Apparently, the humidity of Houston was something the ride couldn't handle, and it would be better off in a more consistent climate like California. It stood dormant for 2 years before its removal at the end of the 2002 season, being shipped off to Six Flags Marine World. Back in 1999, Houston was awarded a new NFL franchise. The Houston Oilers had played in the Astrodome for 29 seasons, but in 1997, they moved to Tennessee. The new franchise would be called the Texans, joining the league in 2002, and they would build a brand new top-notch stadium. The only question was, where? The Astros just built one downtown, but the Texans settled on a plot of land right next to the Astrodome. This $352 million palace named Reliant Stadium. On game days, the Texans would be using Astroworld's normal parking lot, so on the 4 dates when the park was open and there was an NFL game, park guests would need to park farther away. In order to improve attendance, Waterworld and Astroworld merged for the 2002 season, no longer requiring a separate ticket for both. Waterworld now becoming a new themed area of Astroworld. After 3 years with no new additions, Astroworld finally received 2 new rides for the 2003 season. For thrill seekers, there would be SWAT, an SNS Power Sky Swatter prototype, the world's tallest looping ride at 105 feet, rising up to swat the sky and then diving back down to Earth. Known for their water rides, Astroworld was about to add a new one. Diablo Falls sat its riders in circular boats, spinning constantly as the boat goes into spirals, drops, twists, and turns. Both of these rides would stand on the former land of Texas Tornado. Despite these 2 new rides, attendance dropped another 5% down to 1.7 million, tied for 36th place in the country with its Texas neighbor, Six Flags Fiesta Texas. The park was in a downward spiral, and to make it worse, so was Six Flags Incorporated. Under Premier Parks, the chain ballooned to 39 properties, acquiring parks and flooding them with new additions at a rapid pace. Just months after saying they would not be selling off any of their parks, in March of 2004, they reversed course. They would sell off 8 of their properties, 7 of those being in Europe and the other being Six Flags Worlds of Adventure, a park they poured money into since 2000. They sold these 8 parks at a loss of $290 million, trying desperately to find money to pay down their $2 billion debt. Dennis Spiegel of International Theme Park Services said, "They had to get rid of some of these properties. Why the House of Cards hasn't collapsed before is amazing." The company had lost money for 5 straight years, aligning with the height of their spending spree. Gary Slade of Amusement Today weighed in, and he said it would make sense for Six Flags to continue shedding their parks, especially their lower performing properties. Spiegel agreed with Slade, citing Six Flags Mexico, Six Flags St. Louis, and Six Flags Astroworld. Houston, St. Louis, they've never been stellar properties. They're older properties. They're at that point where they require capital. Six Flags was in turmoil, and in the summer of 2005, Dan Snyder made a play to take control and overhaul the company. Through his investment firm, Red Zone LLC, he bought 34.9% of the company's stock, almost tripling their current share. He had been voicing his criticisms and suggestions to management, but they turned a deaf ear. Snyder said he intended to protect his investment by all available means, and this was it. He pointed out all the unused land the parks owned and were paying taxes on, and how they could use partnerships with name brands to make more money. Pizza, ice cream, cell phones, many other brands. All this would increase revenue. He also wanted to bring in a new CEO, ESPN's programming executive, Mark Shapiro. Kieran Burke was the current CEO, holding that post at Six Flags ever since the buyout in 1998, and his days were obviously numbered. But he had one more plan to help the chain, and this one would prove to be devastating.
Turn out the lights, the party's over. 37 years of Houston history have come to a close.
Same time I want to cry. I'm going to miss it.
After all the teasing from above, it's finally time for the last ride. And that's the end. We're live at Astroworld. I'm Jeremy Diesel, 11 News.
After 37 years, this was the end of the road. Between Six Flags' financial turmoil, declining attendance at the park, and a dispute over parking rights with the Houston Texans and the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, Six Flags decided this was the time to close the park. Doing this instead of putting forth the investment to upgrade the park and add new rides. Leading up to this announcement, Six Flags had sued the Harris County Sports and Convention Corporation, accusing them of failing to honor their contract, allowing them to extend their parking rights at Reliant Stadium. This agreement was in place for decades, predating Reliant Stadium when they would park in the Astrodome lot. This expired in August 2005, and Six Flags claimed they had the option to extend it 30 years. Harris County said this option was not in the contract. They were willing to lease parking space to Astroworld, but wanted to move the guests to a different lot during football games and when the rodeo was in town. Less than a week before the announcement was made, talks fell apart, and Six Flags said this was a factor in closing the park. However, a much bigger factor was real estate prices. They had shot up in Houston in recent years, and Kieran Burke thought the best thing for the company and the best way to enhance shareholder value was to cash in. "We had a great run with Astroworld and have been proud to serve as a family entertainment venue in the community for so many years. The site has great potential for economic development. This site spanned 109 acres, and some experts said it could sell for between $95 and $145 million, anywhere between $600,000 to $1 million an acre. Kieran Burke thought he could get as much as $150 million for the land. There was one sobering voice in the wind, Arlington-based real estate broker Tom Brownell, the man who sold Six Flags excess real estate in several areas nationwide back in the 90s. He said it may be hard to sell the land. I think it would be challenging, depending upon what kind of development is proposed. After 25 years in the business, I'm just really skeptical that you can just put up a for sale sign on something like that, in that part of Houston, and earn top dollar for stockholders. 119 permanent jobs would be lost, but many of the full-time workers would be offered positions at other parks in the chain. Many of the 45 rides would also find new homes throughout the chain, depending on their age and portability. Guests had a month and a half to bid the park farewell, set to close at the end of October. For the last weekend, park officials estimated the park would hit capacity, so it closed the ticket booths. Only season pass holders and people who pre-purchased tickets would be allowed in. On Sunday, October 30th, A flood of cars were lined up to get into the complex, but most of them were there for the football game. The crowd at Astroworld was thinner than expected. Those who arrived got their last rides on their favorite coasters. Some had scrawled farewell messages on the wood of Texas Cyclone, and that was it. The ride was officially over. There is going to be a generation that is not going to be able to experience everything I did when I was young. They are going to miss out on a lot of memories. It's sad. Our childhood was here. This was everything to us. It was always a place we could count on to go and have a great time. It is going to be missed sorely. Dan Snyder and Red Zone LLC gained control of the board a month later, and by mid-December, Kieran Burke was removed as CEO. Mark Shapiro would take his place. Six Flags would continue to sell off its smaller properties while trying to find a buyer for the Astroworld land. As the calendar rolled over to 2006, Astroworld held an auction to sell off some of the park's artifacts, whatever would not be moved to the other parks. This included an industrial sewing machine, a disco ball. One man wanted to buy Antique Taxi number 14, that being where he proposed, and one man bought a life-size fiberglass longhorn steer for $12,500. In May, Six Flags found a buyer for the land. After spending $20 million clearing the land, they reported to earn just $77 million in the sale. That was about half of what Kieran Burke wanted, less than the lowest estimate from the experts just a year prior, and vindicated Tom Brownell's prediction that this would not be the cash cow that Six Flags was expecting. The land was expected to be parceled out, developed for different uses, but almost all of it ended up in the hands of the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, and for over a decade, it was used as a parking lot. In 2018, the rodeo expressed interest in using the land for additional event space, educational exhibits, committee meeting space, fundraiser and event locations. But as of today, on what would have been the park's 55th anniversary, it remains a lot for storage and parking. After closing, a lot of the rides were dispersed. Batman the Escape was moved to Darien Lake in New York, but it was never rebuilt. This would be sold for scrap in 2018. Grease Lightning had a similar fate, being moved to Joyland in Lubbock, Texas in 2006, but it sat dormant for a dozen years. Its train was sold to Frontier City to be used on Silver Bullet, and the ride was scrapped in 2019. Ultra Twister was sent to Six Flags America near Washington, D.C. It sat in storage for 4 years before being scrapped. Serpent was the park's first coaster, and that was demolished. The trains being sent to Six Flags Over Texas for their mini mine train. Viper and Accelerate were also dismantled and discarded. Viper's trains going to Six Flags Over Georgia for Mindbender, and Accelerate's trains going to Magic Mountain for Ninja. Once the world's #1 wooden coaster, Texas Cyclone was torn down, its trains to be sent to Laron to be used on Le Monster. Only 2 coasters were successfully relocated. Serial Thriller was moved to the Great Escape in New York, sitting in storage for 4 years. Then it crossed the border into Canada, reopening in 2010 at Laron as Ednor. Mayan Mindbender was shipped across the state to Amarillo, being in storage at Wonderland for 2 years before being rebuilt, opening in 2009 as an outdoor coaster called Hornet. Wonderland would also adopt Gunslinger, reopening as Fiesta Swing. Dungeon Drop would be moved to Six Flags St. Louis as Superman Tower of Power. Diablo Falls and SWAT were both moved to Six Flags New England, renamed Splashwater Falls and Catapult. Warp 2000 was stripped down for its parts, some going to Six Flags Great America, the rest going to Six Flags Over Texas. They also received their Scrambler, Runaway Rickshaws, reopening as Sidewinder. Big Kahuna would also be moved to Darien Lake. As for Looping Starship, well, that was sunk to the bottom of Mammoth Lake in Clute, Texas, starting its new life as an artificial reef. 18 years after its closure, Astroworld's memory is kept alive by some of its old rides, and for the younger crowd that never got to experience the park, rapper and Houston native Travis Scott has brought some attention back to it. In 2018, he released his 3rd studio album called Astroworld, honoring a part of his childhood that was taken away. In an interview with GQ, Scott said, "They tore down Astroworld to build more apartment space. That's what it's gonna sound like taking an amusement park away from kids. We want it back. We want the building back. That's why I'm doing it." It took the fun out of the city. 18 years later, despite the experts' predictions after the closure of Astroworld, we still haven't seen a major amusement park come back to the Houston area, the 4th largest city in the entire nation. Houston had a thriving park that just didn't get the investment it needed to stay relevant. It spent a decade getting nothing but recycled coasters, and then the investments completely dried up. This happened right when the rest of the chain was going crazy, adding the newest and greatest rides on the market. Astroworld became run down and had a bad reputation as a dirty park. It was a gradual slide that started in the 1980s, starting to become more apparent at the turn of the century, and a perfect storm of external factors proved to be the death blow. Chaos from the top, stonewalled by Reliant Stadium, and the drop in attendance they couldn't seem to rectify. Astroworld's last day of operation was my 18th birthday, and I never got to visit the park. Through immersing myself in this documentary and doing months of research, I feel like I got a good sense of the park, from Judge Roy Hoffman's thriving jewel of his Astrodomain, all the way until its final day in 2005. I thank you all for taking this journey with me, and special thanks to everyone who took the time to film the park while they still could. Six Flags Houston, Kenny Ryman, John Y. Chen, Ron Smith, everybody else. Thank you so much for making this documentary possible. If you know anyone who would be interested in this documentary, I would appreciate if you shared this with them. This was a massive project and I appreciate all the support I could get. And if you enjoyed this walk through history, please drop a like. If you have any memories of Astroworld, good or bad, please leave them in the comments below. Thank you all once again for watching, and I'll see you all next time for the history of great adventure in 2024.